Blog Talk Radio.
Welcome to Revelations with Erin Pizzey. On this show, we will be exploring the issues faced by men and boys everywhere. Your host, Erin Pizzey, opened the first ever domestic violence refuge for battered women and children in Chiswick, England. What she found, however, was that many of the women coming into her shelter were as violent as the men they were fleeing. Over the years, she also tried to create resources and safe spaces for men as well as women, but frequently met with indifference and hostility to men's suffering.
For so many years, feminists have been able to demonize men under their artificial argument called patriarchy. Hi, I'm Erin Pizzey, and through working with battered women in my refuges, I saw for myself how family violence is passed on from one generation to the next. Quite simply, violent behaviour is often carried forward into adult relationships. Family violence is not a gender issue, and never was. It's a generational issue. Feminists have had people believe that men are responsible for all the violence in our society. There is sufficient evidence that both men and women can be equally violent in their personal relationships.
The truth is that men and boys are not privileged in our society, but are often marginalised, disadvantaged and ignored. Welcome to Revelations with Erin Pizzey and her co-host, Dean Esme.
Hi, I'm James Williams, standing in for Dean Esme, who sends his regards to all, and co-hosting with the inimitable Erin Pizzey. Hello, Erin.
Hello, from a very wet, windy London.
Oh, it's wet everywhere. I think it's almost like a UK broadcast, this one, isn't it? Because on the other end of the line, we've got Nadine O'Connor. Hello, Nadine.
Hello both.
Hiya, how are you doing? Well, it's very good it's quite a pleasure to be on with you two fine ladies, because you've got a history of campaigning. You've been at the wheel for quite some time, and Erin is a worldwide figure recognised for her work. So, Nadine, you've come into the news recently with having a go at Kate Winslet. Is that not true?
I don't think I was having a go at her. I actually, really, what I did was repeat some comments she'd made, actually, James. I mean, she kind of kicked this off herself, as she was doing a lot of publicity around the film just before Christmas. And in the Vogue magazine back in October, she had basically started talking about her arrangements. She's got now 3 children by 3 different fathers. And she was talking about shared parenting, which is something you don't often get when celebrities are talking about their films, but she touched on the subject, and she simply stated that, my kids don't go back and forth, none of this 50-50 time with mum and dad, my children live with me, that's it. And at the time, actually, we didn't pick up on it straight away, but a lot of newspapers did, because they picked up and said, you know what, Kate, that's the kind of comment that's going to get Batman sitting on your roof, implying, making reference to our old campaigns. And we looked at it and we thought, actually, no, this is a very provocative thing to say. And so we thought, right, we're going to respond, because when people do make comments in the public domain like that, organisations like us, when it's our subject, we do respond.
Yeah, you got the advert. I've got a picture of the advert here. Kate, every child deserves their father this Christmas. And was that the main poster ad you put in?
Well, yeah, we got the advert ready to run before Christmas. We always do something around about Christmas time anyway, because it's a very emotive time of year, because we know, and we are open 365 days a year, we get a massive peak on Christmas Day, because there are so many dads and mums out there who are not seeing their children, and it's a very desperate time of year. So we always do something around about Christmas anyway to raise the profile and make sure that people, remember that this is the situation. And so it kind of tied in with our Christmas campaign. And so we simply drew up the advert in response to her own comments. So we weren't commenting on her, we were actually just repeating what she had said. And before we'd even run the advert, her solicitors were on the phone. So we were being threatened before we'd even run the advert.
What do they say then? What sort of threats did they give you?
Well, they threatened to take us to court. They were saying it was slanderous, it was defamatory, and
well,
that this was it. Because if you actually look at our advert, the text that we put on there, we were very, very specific. Yeah. I mean, it says, it repeats her comments, and we just simply said we disagree. We actually think,
that's what behaviour. Yeah, that sort of behaviour to me smacks of bullying. It's trying to bully you into shutting up, not embarrassing her.
Well, that was my reaction, and I thought, well, actually, this is, there was a lot of backwards and forwards between us and her solicitor Shillings, who are, known as the super injunction solicitors over here. I mean, they are big, nasty solicitors as solicitors go. And we went backwards and forwards, and they were making all sorts of legal threats to us. And unlike most people, when we get a legal letter, we actually get really quite excited, and it goes in a frame in our toilet. We've got quite a few of them. And so we said, well, actually, you know what? If you're going to sue us, please go ahead, because we didn't even have to run that advert, and we were getting shed loads of publicity because she reacted.
Yeah, well, you would do.
Absolutely.
What did she expect? I mean, this is outrageous. I mean, it's a David and Goliath situation, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's what you're looking at. Erin, what do you think of this?
Well, I thought about it when I saw it. And to begin with, I had to think about how I felt. And my feeling was this. When I was much younger and the children were younger, I was married to somebody working in television. And he wasn't there very much because most of the time he was away filming and making programs. And, it's a very absorbing life. So when we separated, certainly I would have said the same thing. The children were with me full time and saw him whenever they could because he was peripatetic at that time of his life. Having said that, obviously it made a difference that what we decided to do is he lived downstairs for several years. So when he was home, he had access to the children, but full time they lived with me. So that was my first feeling. And secondly, the other thing I wanted to ask you, Nadine, is any of this coming from the fathers? I mean, did she have a private arrangement with the fathers, because they're all in the business, that the children would live full time with her, and they accepted that and were comfortable with it?
Well, that we didn't know, and that's why we were very specific on the advert, because we weren't making any assumptions, we weren't making any comment. We simply repeated what she said, and it was that line is actually part of a much wider paragraph in the original Vogue article, and she went on to say a lot more. We know that her first husband, when they separated and divorced, he had problems having contact with the daughter. And he, at the time, spoke about that and said that he supported Fathers for Justice and what we did. So that was already in the public domain, that was already on record. Now, as we all know that you have to be practical about these things, but from our point of view, it was a very provocative statement. And at a time where shared parenting is a big issue, we're a big campaign group, we're talking about it all the time. What I was worried about was that here is a very high-profile celebrity mum. Mm-hmm. Now, I'm not making comments about the fact that she has 3 children by 3 different fathers, but a lot of people were. What I was saying was that it was about possessions. These are my children. That was what was coming across to me. And when you have high-profile celebrity mothers doing things like that and saying things like that, it does have an influence on everyday mums up and down the country. They'll be sitting there going, you know what, if Kate can do that, so can I. And we went back to her and said, well, because first of all, they came back and said, well, that's not what she meant. And I said, well, okay, but that's what she said. If she didn't mean it, can she retract that and come out and support shared parenting, if that's what she does really mean?
It's an interesting point you raised there, Nadine, because you said she regarded as my children. I'm looking at other places as well, and it's just as well as there's two ladies I'm talking to here, because you can probably correct me on this. But my view is where there's a relationship breakdown in particular, there's a tendency for the mothers to see the children as their possessions, whereas the fathers tend to see them as their responsibilities. And I'm not sure if that's 100%. That's not 100% because human behaviour is never 100%. But in saying that, if a mother sees the children as their possession, then in a sense they see them as extensions of themselves.
Yeah,
is that correct?
Actually, James, you have to have a very sanguine look, and first of all to say, in defence of all parents, most normal couples getting a divorce, normal people prioritise their children's needs, and neither side, and that is most people. The hardcore people that we're mostly dealing with, I don't know if Nadine agrees with this, but mostly have quite serious personality disorders, and they cannot put their children or anybody else first except them and their needs. And that's when you're talking about women who see their children as really, they're hostages, aren't they, Nadine?
Yeah, they're pawns in a game. It's bartering.
And they use them as a chip, or rather like playing poker. Now, this is the bulk of the work that I do is with one or other, and an awful lot of my work is with women who are withholding their children. And at the end of the day, of course, the thing is difficult for anyone with a personality disorder to understand is that the other party, the party that isn't practicing alienation, has history on their side, even though in so many cases with men, all you can say, with tears running down your face sometimes because it is so agonizingly hard, is to say, all I can offer you is that when the children grow older, they will come and look for you.
Yeah.
And that's not much comfort to a man. The other problem with alienation, parental alienation, if it starts young enough, and I have men coming to me in their 60s and 70s who have never had their children come looking for them, because now that we know how plastic small children's brains are, we recognize that a severe alienation against another parent can actually alter the brain of the small child to where that child sees the other partner through the alienating parent's eyes. And that is really dangerous.
Do you know, just recently, just before Christmas, in fact, I was asked to review a book called Can't Explain. It's not quite published yet. It's coming out, I think it's coming out in March or April, by a guy called Luke Matthews. And he described how he became alienated from his daughter. And it was quite, I say painful, it was well written. It's painful to go through the emotions that he was going through and what he was facing. And bit by bit, he and his daughter were being split by the mother. But one of the things I recognise, I mean, Erin, you mentioned a lot of these people have got personality disorders.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't say pride myself, I see myself as a student of psychopathy. And the mother was displaying psychopathic trends, the way she was behaving, the vindictiveness, the controlling nature, the lying, the cheating and everything else. And when it came to the crunch, when it came to eventually the social services getting involved, they supported her in it. You know, it was incredible. They're not actually trained to deal with personality disorders. And one of the problems you also have, as Nadine probably finds, Nadine, maybe we can talk about this together, but you also, not only do you have the personal situation, but you also have the prevailing political situation where the mother, under any circumstances, is always believed.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And this is one of the things men don't realise.
No, and we have as we know, we have a family court system that says that mother is the carer and father shall pay, and so straight away neither parent is on the same footing. They're not in an equal status. You know, mother is caregiver, primary carer. All the language is so rigged. It's unbelievable, and that is part of our camp. We have to break away from that, and that is going to be a society change.
Yeah, no, Nadine, at the end of the day, I think where you have personality disorder, one of the problems, you can have somebody with a personality disorder, let's say a narcissist, and these are really dangerous, and they make terrible parents, and it's not treatable, the condition. And one of the problems when you get this is that at the moment, in a court of law, both the mother and father, in theory, have equal rights. But this is allowing for people being rational and sane. But where you get an irrational, insane person, the courts don't recognize that. So they will lie, cheat, manipulate, do whatever they like. Under oath doesn't mean anything to them.
No,
and the other person actually doesn't stand a chance.
No. No, but we have a system that is so open to abuse that actually, even if you're not at the far end of the scale of the narcissism and that exploitation, that even if somebody is just thinking, how can I exploit this system, and they're perfectly sane, you can do it. You can absolutely do it. So there are no safeguardings in there. There's no that anybody can manipulate that system. And you're right that anybody who has the extreme personality disorders will not only be manipulating the system, but all the people they come into contact with in that process.
But the thing is,
the family court's like a circus, isn't it? You see, the thing people don't realise, the narcissist or the disordered personality of one or the other disorders, to them, the whole of the agencies, everybody involved, it's theatre for them. It's their moment in the sun. It's their moment when they're crazy famous as far as they're concerned. So they are more than willing to tangle in the courts. Now, if it's women, now they've actually cut an awful lot of legal aid, but in the old days, the woman had deep pockets because the taxpayers paid.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I mean, you know this as well, Nadine, yourself with the guys you dealt with Files for Justice, but as many guys ended up with tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of pounds worth of debt. And the mother cost her nothing at all.
Absolutely, yeah. And I'm not entirely sure that with the change to legal aid that is having any effect at the moment, because in the past you know that you used to go into the solicitor and they'd say, can you qualify for legal aid? And mum would go, well, actually I've got this and this, and then they say, but if you claim domestic violence, we can tick that box and you get your blank check.
Domestic violence is the big cash winner. Yes.
It was, and now they say that obviously you have to prove that before you can do it, but I am still seeing that card being played and exploited. And my biggest bugbear with that is not only does it do the fathers and the children harm, actually the genuine victims of domestic violence also lose out, because those services, that money and that system is being spent and caught up with those who are playing the system.
But this has been said time and time again. Erin knows Nicola Graham Kevin, don't you? You know that lady.
Yes, she's wonderful. Yeah,
she's absolutely wonderful. And I remember when I went to the domestic violence conference in Slough a few months ago with the Mankind Initiative, and one of the things she said, that she had all her evidence, all her data, all her research stuff, and she'd go to like media people or politicians and that sort of thing. I think she was talking about a media guy. Showed them this is what the real figures of domestic violence are. It's not a gendered issue. And they looked through the stuff and said, well, we don't believe you. And she was saying, well, look, the evidence is there. I have the research evidence in front of you. And the person had a mental block, could not accept the truth being brought before them. And this is a problem. It was a real problem. I spent 4 years as a city councillor in Portsmouth, and I encountered a strong feminist element within the city council, and they clustered around domestic violence issues. Anywhere where there was a gender issue, they went for it. And I sort of likened it to like a paedophile being drawn to children. It was like that, and they would go anywhere they could, work in a job. You wouldn't find a feminist, concerned about, transport issues, unless it was involved with taxiing women or something. It was so crass and obvious, and I thought to myself, well, this is happening across the country. It can't be just Portsmouth. It's happening in Birmingham and Edinburgh, everywhere else.
I think one of the things you're talking about, and I just as a personal example, a few years ago, I was at a conference, and Harriet Harman was speaking after me, and I talked to the audience about the fact that it has always been generational violence. It has never been gendered violence. And it's perfectly traceable in families. You can see it coming down either side. Some people, some children transcend the violence. I can trace my family's violence back both generations, at least three generations. You can see it coming down. Okay, having cleared that, I then said, she mumbled something when she walked in next to me. And I said, Harriet, you really do have to actually look at the figures for domestic violence. I just said, because they're actually equal. And she swung round and her face completely changed, and she almost spat out the words, male violence towards men is actually minimal. And it was like this, and I looked at her and I thought, we have no hope here. This woman...
Yeah. Well, Harriet Harman is we call her, she's the leader of the feminist Taliban in our office. That's how we refer to her, because at the end of the day, when you talk about domestic violence for men, it's not a vote winner. So they are completely blind to it in government.
They don't want to know. That's right.
You can have your and we had this about 2 or 3 years ago when they were making all the cuts across all the local authorities and the charities and the various support groups around the country. You were slashing money where there was men's organisations and men's issues, but they were being retained in the domestic violence, women's aid, and that group.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
That, having said that, I know many refugees that have been refused financing, and my concern in 1971, when I opened the refuge, was I knew that there was a paper about 100 years earlier by a woman called Frances Power Cobb, and she was writing about domestic violence then. And she went to Parliament, and Disraeli cried when he heard the evidence, and they had a select committee, and nothing happened until I opened that refuge in 71. My fear is because everybody has allowed this to go on for all these 40 years, and this is fraudulent what's been happening, because the money has actually been raised on a lie, the lie being that it is only women who are victims of violence and not men, and it's $1 billion industry.
It is. It's not about care anymore. It's about money. It's about industry, and it's about getting, I'm afraid, women through the door and bums on seats. I mean, I've several kind of cases that I've worked on where I have come up against the actions of groups like Women's Aid, who have set out to deliberately deny a father contact, and that's not about. So their whole modus operandi that when I've come across, and in fact I went to them myself right back at the beginning of my case, because I mean when I started there wasn't very many support groups and things, and I thought, well, who do I go to, for help and advice? This is before I went and spoke to Fathers for Justice, and I went to Women's Aid, and they went, oh yeah, we can help you. You need to move into one of our refuges, and we can help you ensure that your daughter won't see your husband, and there'll be no contact. And I said, hang on a minute, you've got this wrong. Firstly, I have a lovely house, which I do not wish to move out of. And secondly, I'm not here to deny contact. I want you to just help me get this process speeded up, help me through the process. I want some help and advice, etc. But their whole focus was about taking me out, putting me in a refuge and denying contact. And I thought, well, maybe that was just a one-off, maybe that was me. But I came across it time and time again with some dads that I've been helping over the years. And I thought, this is not about children. This is not about parenting. This is about money and getting those women through the door. And once they were through the door, they were telling them all sorts.
No, it's absolutely. Sorry, you go first.
Just going to say, this happened in 1974 when Women's Aid formed a national charity against everything that we at Chiswick Women's Aid knew and practiced. And we said at that time to them, the fact is, it's generational, and what you're doing is essentially carving out an empire, and it'll be jobs for the girls, which is the truth. The National Federation of Women's Aid do not allow men to work in refuges. Men can't sit on the board, and little boys of 9 or 12 can't come into refuges. Yeah. And to me, that is so tragic.
Yeah.
And they're getting public money for doing that as well, which is outrageous. And the thing is as well, I mean, I know my local area and everywhere else, if you are a woman and you claim domestic violence, you get fast-tracked for housing.
Yes,
and,
you do.
And I know one of the workers at the Portsmouth City Council told me that they had one woman come in and they never question it. You claim domestic violence, there's no evidence required. You just say you have.
That's
you
right.
suffered it. And she said she was getting beaten up by her boyfriend to get her housing. And they said, he watched her go out, and her boyfriend picked her up in the car. This same boyfriend took her to the house, because obviously he was going to benefit as well, because he was going to get in the property as well. And yet she was claiming domestic violence purely as a sort of material gain. Another thing is, I've got a friend who's a professional mental health nurse, and he was once called, not so long ago, his wife works in psychiatry as well, and called to a young woman who had mental health issues, and she mentioned he may have been interfered with. So he said, well, I'm not trained for that, but I will take you to the local refuge, where they can assess you and sort you out. He didn't know what they were like. And then he found out, first of all, they wouldn't let him in because he was a man, even though he was a professional, just like a doctor. And he also had to establish that he was going to hand over this woman to somebody who was capable of looking after her. And so, and what they did was, eventually they got somebody. He wouldn't sign anything to say he wasn't going to rape anybody or anything. He refused to do that. But they got someone to look after her. And the woman discharged herself after a few days. And she came to him and she says, the entire time I was there, they were trying to get me to confess that my father raped me. You know, the entire time. She says, my father was a lovely man. He never did anything. He was my greatest asset. And the entire time was spent getting her to confess of a repressed memory issue.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. It's very dangerous. And this is where it comes up to my theory is that actually, you know, the whole family breakdown issue is such a massive £1 million industry in this country. Yes. That they will do what they can, the government, to ensure that that carries on. We don't make anything in this country. We don't build anything. We've got nothing to sell. We are absolutely rock bottom when it comes to that kind of thing. But what we can do is we can open our doors and immigration can come in. That's fine. Yes. But that helps our economy, and we can increase the chances of family breakdown, because family breakdown makes money. It keeps everybody in their quangos and their government departments and all these support things like Women's Aid and CAFCAS and the judiciary going. And those poor people who have broken up then have to go and buy two of everything. Yes. And that keeps our economy. Our economy is based on immigration and family breakdown. It's
based on a lie, isn't it? It's based on one big lie and a big con, a big scam.
I think that's absolutely true. If I might point out, things are getting better because just this week there's been a new edict, a new governmental organization that is writing about the fact that the real victims of domestic violence has always been the children.
Yes.
And I was a child of domestic violence, but both my parents were violent, particularly my mother. Now, we don't talk about the fact that it's largely women who abuse children. And again, it's not ordinary, normal, everyday women. It's actually mostly people with personality disorders cannot be around children because they don't have the self-control needed. And my argument, which I learned very quickly when I was running the refuges, the first thing I needed to do was to create a project for the violent women coming in who were violent to their children. And I said, what we need to do is to mother the mother so she can mother the children. Because how else is she going to know? Now, we don't do that. We don't give anybody a second chance.
No. We have a press in this country which is also hugely influential in this, because we've had, and unfortunately I don't know why, but in the area that I live, we've had an awful lot recently of dads committing suicide but taking their children with them.
Yes.
And when you look into the backstory, it's family breakdown related. But when a mum does it, and there are almost an equal number throughout the country of cases where mum kills herself and takes the children with her, the press plays the victim card. They depict her as, and she is a victim, the children are a victim, and there's no doubt about that, but that's what they do. They hold her up as a victim, they bring out depression and all these sympathetic terms, but when a father does it, he is violent. You know, he's depicted as demonizing, demonized dads.
And this is a thing about the press. They do tend to demonise boys and men across the board. And I think there was a professor in Australia noted it was 60. I can't remember the percentage. It was something like 69% of press reports concerning males were negative. And only about 15 or 16% were positive, where it was very much loaded the other way around with women. But it does, and that's a sad fact across the entire Western world. I remember actually not so many years ago we had a case of a paedophile ring where there was one man. I think he was in Merseyside up in northern England, and there were 5 women who worked at different kindergartens, and they were taking photographs of young children naked and that sort of thing, babies and that stuff. And they were all arrested. 6 of them were arrested. 5 of them were women, 1 bloke. Of course, the guy hadn't met any of the women. It was all done via the internet. But when you looked at some of the press reports, they were trying to say, well, he was, he'd influenced them and things like this, these women to do these things. Well, no normal woman or man would be influenced by somebody emailing them or talking to them on Skype to go and do something hideous like photograph naked children. These decisions were made by those women individually. And yet, the press is trying to make excuses for them.
I think what you're talking about, and I think we have to think about this, there always has been, right the way through history, a chivalrous sense from men that women are more vulnerable and need protection. But also, along with it, went the deification of the idea of the mother. And the greatest of all, of course, is the Virgin Mary, the mother of Jesus Christ. And this has been, I was brought up as a Catholic, so I know that side of it very. So in a sense, as women, we can't win. Because if we are put on our pedestals, if we step off the pedestal because we're not a good mother or whatever other reason, we will get actually pilloried. Because you're either a good woman or you're a bad woman. And my feeling is if we can get away from this whole concept of men bad, which is what has been going on now for... I first came across a document in 1990. It was called The Family Way. It was Harriet Harman, Anna Coote, and another MP.
I've never seen that,
Yeah. Now, it was Harriet Harman who actually said that men were not necessarily harmonious to family life.
Yeah, I know the report, yeah.
And she also said, if you remember, that the new family unit would be women and children.
Yes.
So this gives us the agenda. And then, I can't remember who the other woman was, but she was at one point also a woman's minister. But she said that we needed more men working in primary schools, but unfortunately, we can't trust men, i.e., all men are pedophiles. Now, I personally have worked with as many women pedophiles as I have men, and exactly the same thing. The majority of them, virtually all of them, were molested as children. So if we want to stop, if we want to empty our prisons and we want to empty our mental hospitals, well, then we have got to look at protecting children actually in the womb. Because I've always said this, because I noticed this with pregnant women coming in. A cigarette you smoke, you share with your child. A drink, you share with your baby. The chemicals of rage and fear, you also share with your baby. So the baby is actually born, wired up to be virtually violence-prone in most cases. And unless you're very lucky, and like me, you find a mentor. When I was about 9, this woman, Miss Williams, changed me. I was an extremely dangerous child and very deviant. And she was my mentor, and to her I owe everything. And
was that Margaret Hodge, the other one?
No, I've got the quote here, actually.
Yeah.
I'll read it out. It says, it cannot therefore be assumed that men are bound to be an asset to family life, or that the presence of fathers in families is necessary, a means to social harmony or cohesion. That was done by Anna Coote, Harriet Harman, and Patricia Hewitt.
That's it, yeah.
And the title was The Family Way. That was it, yeah.
But you know what? Having sort of nailed their colours to the mast, I am aghast that they're still loose and able to continue, because with this attitude in very powerful positions, how is everything going to change?
Well, it's not, and that's our stumbling block in this country is government. And everybody goes, well, you've been campaigning, Fathers for Justice for 10, 12 years. You haven't made any difference? Well, unfortunately, successive governments, and it doesn't really matter which colour they've been, they have all had that document to read, and I think they all believe in that, and that is why over the last 30 years we have seen a move to emphasise the mother is the carer and the father. You can abandon your child tomorrow as a father as long as you pay, and that's what Harriet Harman is saying. You could be a sperm donor and a cash point, and that is all you are as about. I mean, how their household runs, I don't know. How she speaks to her own husband, I have no idea what their conversations are like.
Well, Harriet Harman was known for bypassing the women's only shortlist to get her husband parachuted into a safe seat, didn't she? So it didn't count to her when it came to her own sort of affairs. And also, she's supposed to be sort of socialistic. You sent all children to private school, so she's not very socialist.
That makes her the perfect politician. She's not only two-faced, she can lie through her teeth.
Well, she's a total hypocrite, isn't she?
Yeah. Hypocrite. But unfortunately, what we've got is an entrenched government, as I say, what doesn't matter what colour you are, where they think that, fathers are almost surplus to requirement. They are sperm donors, they are cash machines, and when it comes to wanting to be a father and part of that parent, they look at you as if you've got two heads. why on earth would you want to do it? And we jokingly called her the leader of the feminist Taliban, but that's what it's like. I mean, I sat with Erin a few years ago. Do you remember we were at Cambridge University for a debate?
Yes.
I came out of that evening and I felt physically sick. I had never been in a room with such vile, hate-filled women in my life. I was utterly shocked, and I thought, if that's what's going through our universities, and let's not forget, all these politicians that we've got today are career politicians who've gone through being politicians, researchers, and worked their way up. None of them ever had a proper job in their life, so they're all conditioned and they're all brainwashed into thinking it. But it starts off in our universities, and I came out of there and I swore to myself, my daughter will never, ever go through a university like that and be brainwashed.
Yeah,
that was
first of all, I would like to point out that most women are not like them, unfortunately. But they are But what you're saying is a very.
But those women are making their way into government, and they are making the policies. And as you say, what is the blockage? The blockage is those women in government, but it's also the men who are too damn scared to stand up to them because they don't even have balls themselves. You know,
you're absolutely right. I mean, Douglas Hurd, the ex-British minister, what was he, Foreign Secretary years ago? But he actually said that exactly what you've said. There were a lack of politicians in the government, British government, and I think probably across the world, in fact, nowadays, that they haven't done a proper job. They've never done a proper job. You know.
But you know what? Let's just concentrate also on the fact that this is an international problem.
Yeah.
And it has been for years. Now, of all the countries, and I've travelled all over the world helping to set up refuges, one of the worst countries you'll ever find is Canada. It's absolutely appalling what's going on there because in the days of Pierre Trudeau, when he was in power, he invested huge sums of money in Canada in the emerging women's movement. So they had a head start on everybody else, and you can see the results when you're there, right the way through the judiciary, the agencies, everywhere. And one of the tragedies of all this, and of course now in America, one of the worst proponents is Hillary Clinton, who we gather is going to try and stand for president. Now what she's doing, there's a thing called the VAWA, the Violence Against Women Act. It's $1 billion business, and they every year get voted yet again about the same $1 or $2 billion to continue their programs. Now, the majority of their programs are actually based on working with they call it the perpetrator. Of course, the perpetrator is always men as far as they're concerned, and they use this Duluth model, which is proven to be an absolute waste of time.
It's a total nonsense, isn't it?
It's never been stopped. But just wait a minute, because the point is, what Hillary's move now is to make it global. So it will be adopted globally, the Violence Against Women Act, and it'll be hugely funded so they can spread it across other parts of the world that at the moment haven't been feminized. This is incredibly dangerous, and it's happening everywhere. And my feeling here is that the radical feminist movement is realizing that their original concept, which they brainwashed everybody, is beginning to be very frayed at the edges, as all the international research is showing what I've said all along, that the figures are equal for intimate partner violence, and that in fact it is generational, and it's to the children that we should be looking. So this means that suddenly there's going to be a switch round as they move the whole concept onto the needs of the children. And
it's long overdue, isn't it? It's long overdue for children.
No, you missed the point. The point is, they will move in on this new idea, which is it's the children we should be looking at, because they will then get further funds. It's not anything to do with being benign or changing their minds. It's again about funding. And fathers, yet again, will fail to be able to have access to their children. And that's why it bothers me when I see this happening, because I'm thinking to myself, yes, because the document that I read, which came out this week, actually, was talking about how that domestic violence damages children. Witnessing is as bad as actually damaging the children physically. Fine, we know that. We've known that for the last 40 years. But if you watch the radical feminists making their moves, it will be only the girls are affected. Because I said right at the beginning, when I was looking at of the first 100 women that came into the refuge, of which 62 were as violent as the men they left, and violent to the children, I was saying, how can you pretend it's only little girls who are affected by violence when little boys are equally affected, if not more, actually, when it's the mother?
Well, it's very true, and the sad thing is that this is being peddled out. I mean, I mentioned earlier about my interest in psychopathy. Hillary Clinton was on one of the lists that someone had put on as being a psychopath, so that'd be interesting to see. I don't know her personally, of course, but some of the things they cited to her and showed was an example of her attitude to the invasion of Afghanistan and the callous disregard to life. So, she has that side to her. And another thing is she's been behind, one of the proponents behind the scheme to circumcise a million young men and boys in Africa. Was it more than that? 30 million. I've got your number now. And on the grounds that it will stop AIDS. Well, anyone knows how AIDS is spread knows damn well it won't be stopped that way. But they're already putting this into practice into play. And as we all know, any sort of operation, surgical or otherwise, carries risk. And you've had even in the UK, children, boys who've been circumcised and lost their lives because of it. And they're forcing this on Africa. And she's one of the politicians that's forcing this through. So therefore, she's got a record, and I'm not looking forward to her getting to be president. Just about anyone else could do the job rather than her. And it's nothing because I don't want to see a woman in president, but just that she is not the person to be there, as far as I'm concerned. One thing before, because I know there's something that you wanted to talk about, Nadine. It was about the Hague Convention. But before we go there, I did a Freedom of Information request from the British government to ask them how much it costs to run the family court system. And they gave me a figure of £263 million a year. They said that includes the Court of Protection, and that did not include money given to CAFCAS. £263 million is a lot of money, it sounds like, but when you're talking billions in terms of a country the size of the UK, it's not a lot. But the amount of, if you can economise it or work it out in maths, the amount of money it costs for the damage done to the children, the suicides, the loss of work time, things like that, is incalculable. I worked out that from a few years back, that from people being sent to prison because the failure of the family justice system ran into something like, I think it was something like £12 billion. Obviously 12 billion, that's people who've been sent to prison because they've been screwed up one way or another. So, what is the point of the family court system? Why not abolish the family courts? Do we need a family court? If it cannot do its job properly of helping children, and they always trot out this thing, best interests of the children, but they never define what it means. But if they can't even do what is in the best interest of the children, why do we bother having them? Why not save the government some money by cutting them all together? I mean, people can get married at a registry office. Why not get divorced at a registry office as well? What do you think about that? You're
right, and we've been saying for a very, very long time now is that actually not only do we need to change the law in this country so that at the point of separation and divorce, that both parents are equal. There is a presumption of contact, 50-50, because unless you start there, one of you will be starting in a negative position, so you will never be able to both be parents and you'll be treated equally. So regardless of what else is going on and what else has happened in your relationship, if you start at that 50-50 point where you're both equal, and then you obviously bring in all the other things that you want to moan about, he never puts his socks away, so that takes a few points off of him, and she never does the washing up and all the, and then of course solicitors get involved and they think this is going to go on for years and make them lots of money, so they ramp up the accusations left, right and centre, and before you know, he's a full-blown child abuser and she's a violent alcoholic, and it just gets an absolute mess. But if you start off at that equal point, then I actually believe that the majority of cases that we see go through the courts today would not need to be going through the courts at all.
I agree with you.
What has happened is that because you have to go to a solicitor and you have to go through the court process to get divorced and sort out your arrangements for children, unless you are really, really lucky, you are suddenly sucked into a system where they say they act in the child's best interest, but there is nothing about what they do that is showing you that they act in the child's best interest. They act in their own interests, which is to prolong your agony for as long as possible, take as much money off of you or the state, whoever happens to be paying, and drag it out for their own interests and nobody else's. So you have to break that system. That is the abuse in the family courts, not what goes on in people's houses as they claim, but it's the system itself that is abusive. And we have to break that up. You are right. In most cases, the breaking up of the family, the sorting out the children, is a paperwork exercise. It doesn't need to. Courts are for criminals. They are not for a breakdown in your relationship, which is a very sad thing, but it is in most cases not a criminal offence. So we shouldn't be anywhere near them. So we need a family justice review, not the effort that was done 2 or 3 years ago with the Family Justice Review panel here, which was an absolute sham, which for the record said that, fathers have no rights and they should have no rights. What we want is proper wholesale reform, and that's what we've been saying in Fathers for Justice for many, many years. You start at that 50-50 equal point, but we need to reform the whole system. But we need, most of all, to get people out of the court system. They do not act in the child's best interest, and I can tell you that because they have no records to show whether they have or not. When you finish your court case and your paperwork gets bundled up and put in the file, nobody comes to find out how it's affected those children, how it's affected you, whether or not it's working, and whether or not the decisions they made were actually in anybody's best interests, because they've taken their fat check and on their way and they chuck you out with the rubbish. So we have to have something other than the family court system, because the system we've got is exploited, and it's an abuse. That is the abuse of children. And as we know, the worst abuse goes on behind closed doors, and that's what we've got. If we're going to use the family court system, it has to be completely open. It has to be completely transparent. If you're going to be the judge and decide somebody's future, you're going to have your name out there so everybody knows what you're doing. You have to be judged by the public, who should be able to sit there and watch what's going on. I also think that if it's open and the public and your peers and your family and everybody else is sitting behind you, I guarantee that most people won't sling the mud that they do to try and outbid the other parent. So that, it's a culture. And let's not forget that if you're a politician and you've not come up through the ranks as a political researcher, you sure as hell probably come through the judiciary, and you're a solicitor. Okay,
well, most of them are, aren't they? Most of them are solicitors.
Exactly. So we have a government full of people who have benefited financially from this abusive system. So we have to really break this up and destroy it, because it is going to. They say that Nick Clay, they're always going on about social engineering. The biggest problem we've got in this country is the social engineering that comes from family breakdown. That's the social engineering that's going on. That is where young boys are growing up in this country without any positive male role models. They have no male teachers, because no man would dare go into primary school education these days for fear of being accused of a child abuser. So you've got young boys being brought up by single mothers, being taught in an all-female environment. So their first encounter with men is probably in gangs. For girls, it's usually sexual, and it ends up in an unwanted teenage pregnancy. I mean, the statistics in this country are so appalling that really we are in a state of emergency when it comes to society and family breakdown. And with the statistics, I mean, they rattle off the statistics that when they want to prove their money for all these domestic violence things. But when we're looking at 3.8 million children in the UK alone who are fatherless, nobody's ever kept any records to see if any of this has worked.
And there's no follow-up to see what the outcome is for these people. I mean,
absolutely. I know more about my dog, and my dog has more legislation than my children do.
Yes.
So we have more legislation in this country to protect dogs and stray dogs, and there's more support there if you pick a stray dog off the street than if you do children.
Yeah, it's a disgrace. And what you say about boys, I mean, there was an article the other day saying teaching boys to respect girls in school. Well, what the earth's that got to do with things? And they were citing that the boys are getting overwhelmed with gaming and internet pornography, and therefore showing disrespect to girls. And we need to teach them in schools. What business is it for them to start teaching morality?
Hang on a minute, James. Yeah. James, listen. Yeah. I help and in the past teaching small children to read in schools.
Yes.
And I was in a very big school. And I promise you, and I know this from the work I do with domestic violence, sometimes for some children, girls and boys, it is only the first time they step into a school or a primary school or a nursery where they are actually socialized at all. Because if you're in a violent family, you learn nothing except if you're ruled by the boot and the fist, that's how you behave. So yes, unfortunately, we have to actually look at schools and begin to say that programs like Sure Start are absolutely vital for children who are coming from violent families. Yes, schools do have to teach boys how to behave towards girls, and girls how to behave towards boys. I'm afraid
it's one-sided, isn't it? That's the thing. They only look at the boys towards girls, never the other way around, you know.
Yes, but I do think, I agree with both of you. A lot of what you say is absolutely right, but let's talk about some shoots of health. Judge Mumby, he has been trying to actually get the family courts more open and transparent.
Yes.
He seems to be something, and I have met some very good judges in the family court who are as frustrated as we are, and they know the system has to change. And I've also, thank God, we were very lucky, had excellent solicitors and barristers who work for us for free. So these people are there. Change is coming. I belong to a big international group of women who are calling for shared parenting. And I do think this is coming. I think change is happening. I'm thrilled to hear both your voices because you're passionate and you know what you're talking about. But my feeling is that in 10 or 20 years' time, or probably 20 years' time, and I won't be here to see it, but we will look at what's been happening as the dark ages in human relationships.
But don't you think that's too late, Erin? You see, a child is a child for
late.
Yeah, a child is a child for 16 years. You know, a child is only a child for 16 years. And 20 years means we have lost generations and generations of children in the way. And I hear what you say about Mumby, but I tell you what, there's an awful lot of dads who I've got who've had Mumby as their judge, and they're not seeing their children because of him. Now,
really?
But what's happening is it's an illusion of opening up the family courts, because what will happen is that they will then say, well, yes, you can come in, but you can't report this, and you can't report that, and you can't report that. You either, it's like being pregnant, you can't be a little bit pregnant, you either are or you're not. So you either open up the courts, and you're totally open and transparent, or it's actually not worth doing at all. Yeah. Because we have to see what's going on in here. The only time the press ever reports things is when something really, really bad has happened.
Yes.
But that really, really bad case is happening every single day. 200 children a day are losing contact with their father in the family courts up and down this country. I mean, the statistics go on and on and on, and they're not things to be proud of. Why has it taken, you've been campaigning for, 30, 40 years. We've been doing ours for 12 years. Before us, there was Families Need Fathers. We're going over the same things. We can all see it. 80% of public support is behind equal parenting in this country.
Yes. Everywhere, internationally, actually.
Yes, it is. Yeah.
So why can we not, in this stage of equality, have an equal right for both parents? Open up the courts. If we can't do wholesale reform, at least open it up where people can see what's going on. Because unless you've been through it, you have no idea of the horrors that go on.
The reason why we can't is because the intransigence of government and the people in charge in it, they're not just the politicians, the bureaucrats that operate the system. And we mentioned earlier that we've got some powerful ideologues in the feminist movement that come through the universities and seek out the jobs that they can most affect. And this is one of the problems, the family court area. Yeah. Until we shift those along and until they can meet a measure which shows that they are capable of looking at things impartially instead of going down the gendered issue. I interviewed a young lad a couple of months back. He was abused by his mother, right? And he's been brought up by his dad. And when he told me when he was 4 or 5, he remembers it, the social services came along and they were cataloguing the abuse that he was suffering. He didn't realise they were marking it down against his father. But it was his mother who was doing it all because they were so intent on crucifying the father that they just assumed he was the one who was burning the boy over a hot stove and things like that. I mean, one occasion the lad got his arm held out and she put him as a hot, electric hub, and she put his arm on that, and he's still got the scars today for that. left in there screaming for hours. That's the sort of thing that social services are marking down as doing, the father doing that. And until we can change the people operating the system to take that cloud away from their eyes so they can see reality, we're never going to change anything, because they are operating everything. And I don't know if it's appropriate, but I think it was Voltaire said, if you want to find out who rules you, find out who you can't criticise. And this is the problem. We are unable to get in there, and you get people like Maria Miller who don't want to even talk to you. Right. Harriet Harman, who won't listen, shuts the door on you.
We have a supposed equalities minister. I think it is still Maria Miller. And there's equality, but it's only equality if you're a woman.
Well, exactly. It's not equality then, is it? It's not balanced.
No. Absolutely. Yeah. And people say to me, somebody said to me many, many years ago, when I was going through my own family court case, oh my gosh, you sound like you hate men. I don't hate men at all. I love men. I've had men in my life. I've got a son. How can I hate men? And then as it's gone down the years, my campaign has gone, well, you must hate women. Why aren't you a feminist? And I'm like,
it's just absolute nonsense.
Why are they trying to put me in a box for a start?
I get this in my to people as well. They tell me that I hate women. I said, I don't hate women. You do. I said I don't like feminism because that's an ideology which is corrupt and based on supremacy. I don't hate women at all. And I have to say that Erin was saying that there's a body of women in the world. Women make an enormous difference to this, and it needs women to drive this to make equality work, if we're going to talk about equality. And you've got, on A Voice for Men, you've got people like Karen Straugan, who I greatly admire, and the honey badgers, as they call them. Those women are essential to making change. And I know within the Fathers of Justice, when I first got involved several years ago now, they used to say that one woman's worth 10 men, because of the initiative and the image that she carried forward with her. But like you say, Nadine, we've all been campaigning for many years, Erin, longer than most people, and little has changed. But there is hope there that we can change it. But until we change the people who actually control the system, we're still going to be fighting against this in 20 years' time.
Yeah. I mean, back at the last election, leading up to the 2010 election here in the UK, I went round the main political parties and I said, what is your position on shared parenting? And many of my members will remember that Conservative Party came forward and they said, these are our commitments to family law reform and shared parenting. We support you all the way. In fact, David Cameron stood in front of me on two separate occasions, and I quote, he said, we are going to bring fathers back into the family.
Well, they're making a hard job of it, aren't they?
Well, yes, yeah. And so I got all these fantastic promises from them, and that we were going to hit the ground running, and as soon as they were elected, we were going to start wholesale family law reform. They were going to throw out the Family Justice Review that Labour had intended to do because it wasn't worth the paper it was written on. Yeah. The minute they got elected, they went back on every single one of those damn policies.
Absolutely.
And they implemented the Labour Family Justice Review, which then took 18 months. And within, I think it was in the first Father's Day after David Cameron was elected, he did an interview, I think it was in the Telegraph, and he said that absent fathers should be treated like drunk drivers in society.
I know, I remember that.
And I thought, that is nailing your colours to the mast. Yeah. That man is so heavily influenced by organisations like Mumsnet that he, cannot even think for himself, but he's so worried about losing the female vote that he will totally discredit and alienate men. And that makes him no different from, the Labour Party and the Lib Dems. And I said to him, I will hold you to account on those promises. So we had to go through the farce, which was the Family Justice Review, which, made absolutely no difference, but we then, we wasted 18 months. Then when that was over, they went, we don't actually like what they've said, so we're going to then do this Children and Families Bill, which again has been another 18 months of complete and utter fudging and whitewashing by the government, because all that's happened is that they've gone, well, okay, yes, we like the idea, but where it's safe to do so. So again, straight away, the indication is that fathers are a risk. You cannot say, you can't put legislation in place with the caveat where it says where it's safe to do so, because unless that implies to mums as well. And we all know that is not going to be applying to mum or mum's new boyfriend. It will only ever. CAFCAS are already risk assessing dads from the outset, whether there's been any history of abuse and violence.
Yes.
So they're already on the back foot. So within weeks of being elected, it was pretty clear that David Cameron had no intention of bringing dads back into the family unless they were walking with a great big wad of money and they were paying their maintenance. And that's what we've got in this country, is that you can pay for your child. Okay, if you don't pay, the CSA will chase you around the country and empty your bank account out. But if you're mum and you've got a court order for contact and you don't follow through and you deny that contact, nobody goes after them. Because the government and the judiciary...
internationally.
Yeah,
really
and because they do not want to be seen to be attacking women and mothers. They will fine and imprison parents who do not send their children to school. Yes. You can be fined £100 for doing 34 in a 30-mile-an-hour speed limit. Yes. But nobody will transfer residency. Well, it has been done one or two times, but nobody will transfer residency.
Very rarely,
and nobody will enforce contact orders in this country when mum repeatedly breaks that contact. Yes. And that tells you all you need to know about the judiciary and the government's intentions. Now, we have got European elections this year, and next year we've got another general election. Now, in the last year, we went back to the MP who put her face to those conservative promises, Caroline Noakes, and we said to her, come on, you were the face of those promises. You went out there. Where's your commitment to these promises? You've gone back on your word. And do you know what her response to us was? You're harassing me. And she went to the police because we tried to get her to commit to the promises that she made for an election. We held her to account, and she claimed that she was a victim of harassment.
What were you supposed to be doing to harassing?
Exactly. We emailed her, we phoned her, we challenged her in public.
Okay.
Because we wanted her to come out and say, come on, these are the promises you made.
Yes, that's fair enough.
Now, if you cannot go back and challenge your MP over broken election promises on any subject because they're going to claim they're victims of harassment, it just makes a whole farcical system that we're facing here. So we've got next year the elections. I will be going around every political party again. That will now include UKIP, who are right up there with the other main parties, and I want to see their commitment to shared parenting. Yes. It's not something that is a small issue, a sideline issue nowadays. It's a mainstream issue, and there should be policy on it. And I want to see everybody's cards here.
Nadine, James, it's 7 my time, and I've really got to go. Can I leave you two to talk? Because you've obviously got a lot to say. Okay. So I'm sorry I've got to drop out. Normally this doesn't happen.
Have you got any last thoughts to say, Erin?
No, just to say thank you very much. It's been a wonderful discussion. And Nadine, I'm really pleased to talk to you again.
And lovely to speak to you again, Erin.
And you, darling. Take care.
It's a pleasure. Take care, Erin. Bye. Well, it's just the two of us, Nadine.
Well, three if you count me.
All right, you're in there.
Yeah, this is AVFM radio director James Huff. We've got somebody who's been waiting patiently to come on. Okay. He's one of the hosts for Tales from the Infrared, manning the phones in the back room, but he had something that he wanted to say as well. His name is Christian. I'm going to go ahead and bring him live.
Okay.
Christian, welcome to the show.
Hi, glad Christian. To be here.
Hi, Christian.
Hello. I just wanted to say, can you hear me okay, by the way?
You're absolutely clear, yeah.
Perfect. I just wanted to say something in response to something that Erin said about teaching young boys how to treat girls and teaching young girls how to treat boys. I think what's just as important is teaching young boys how to treat other boys and teaching young girls how to treat other girls. We live in a society where, as boys, men are taught to hate each other and to presume a wide variety of things to help facilitate that hate. We're taught to presume that another man is a potential pedophile or an alcoholic or a wife beater or a drug addict or a loser or a wide variety of things to help facilitate hatred and contempt for other men, whereas we seem to teach young girls to hate other girls, but at the same time love them. You could see a much bigger sense of sisterhood with girls and young women than you see a sense of brotherhood with young boys and with boys and young men. But at the same time, when it comes to things like competing for male attention, you see women sort of turn into excuse the term bitches towards each other.
Yeah.
And I think it's
yeah. But I always used to say that actually probably the worst office you can ever work in as a woman is an all-female office.
Mm. That's been verified by a lot of people. A lot of women who actually worked in those environments said they'd rather work with men than women because of that same situation,
Yeah.
I tend to keep out of those arguments in case I get called sexist or something, but never mind. You can say it if you're a woman, can't you? That sort of setting. There is actually an interesting thing that men do tend to compete for each other, and this is the thing about, I don't know if you've heard, Nadine, about the white knight phenomenon.
No.
White knights are men who will take on other men to protect women, even if the women are totally wrong. They just naturally do it. It's the guys that traditionally used to open the door for a woman and chivalry. Yeah. Well, then there's white knights very often, and very much scowled against because very often they're picking on a guy they won't do anything to help another man very often, but they'll help a woman, even if she's the one that's doing the abusing. So this sort of thing, But what happens is with the men, like if you get men sitting on aeroplanes, they're told to move away from children because they might be, child molesters.
Yes, I think some airlines have policies, don't they, where you...
No, that's right. Yeah, apparently. British Airways have supposedly dropped this, but Qantas and I think New Zealand Airlines and a couple of others do the same thing, which is totally discriminatory because it means that all us guys here are all potential, paedophiles.
Well, that comes back to the CAFA thing that every father is risk assessed. The presumption that you are a risk to your children, which is absolutely crazy. Because last week you were running them to school and changing their nappy, but you've separated, so now you must be a risk to your children.
It's totally outrageous, and unfortunately, it is supported by feminist campaigners because they like that sort of thing because that all helps to fund them. But there is a blog site, the Man Woman Myth. I like some of the stuff that goes on there, and one of the videos he's got, absolutely, is I forget it's called. That Other Man Is You. I think it's called That Other Man Is You, and it's about 6 or 7 or 8 minutes. I'm not sure how long the video is, and it goes through various scenarios of like the sitting on the plane situation, and I think it was it might have been a BA that it happened to. This guy was sitting there and he was told to move, and the boy in front of him was a 12-year-old boy. Okay, and he put the case that in 6 years' time, when he reached 18, that boy would be that man. In other words, he would be regarded as a potential risk to other children. And we tend to not realise this, men, that is, realise that when you see a guy getting treated badly, like he's getting a rough divorce or he's getting beaten up by his partner, I've seen guys laugh about it, joke about it, not twigging that actually that guy it's happening to could be them.
Yeah. And
this Man-Woman Myth video, I think, is one of is one of my favourite bits, because not just because it's short, but it just hits the nail on the head, And I think people ought to watch that as a training video, if you like, as they progress through these issues. I know, Nadine, you wanted to talk about. Sorry.
Well, I was just going to say, when you put it this way, it almost sounds like it's completely arbitrary. It's just a heat of the moment type thing where, if it just so happens that a risk assessment has to be made, if there's a potential for a woman to be in danger, that you have to make a risk assessment of some male somewhere close by. And honestly, I think we're raised to think that I know I'm guilty of this myself. It was only recently that I became aware of it, and as such, I was able to overcome it. But we are raised to make these presumptions about all the other men around us, and think that we are exempt from those assumptions.
Yes, it's not us.
But this is partly...
it's not us, it's the other man. It's not me.
Yeah, exactly.
It's the other man.
This is one of the reasons we want to, have this wholesale family law reform and open up the family courts, because of the secrecy behind it. They are called secret family courts for a reason. So if you have never been married and had children and divorced, you have no idea what goes on. And it's this raising awareness, if anything else, because when it does happen to you and you don't know anybody that it's ever happened to, it's a hell of a shock.
Yes.
And if you've got nothing else then to sort of compare it to, nobody else to talk to, where do you go for help and advice? But this is why, so if you open up the family courts and it becomes less of a secret, less of kind of like speaking behind your hand and sneakily pointing at that person over there, because ultimately, statistically, at the end of the day, you are going to know somebody in the next few years who's gone through family breakdown or had any of these incidents happen to them.
You can't miss them, can you? They're everywhere.
It's going to happen more and more. So if we have open courts and everybody becomes aware of what's going on and we can talk freely and openly about it, that has got to help towards the education, hopefully, of it not happening more.
Yeah.
And we in Files for Justice, over a third of our registered supporters are women. And that is because while family breakdown in the majority of cases, the victim who's coming to us is the father, he will have a mother, he will have a sister, he will have nieces, he will have a new girlfriend, a new wife. Okay, so the knock-on effect of what's happening to that man is then being felt by all these women around him.
Well, do you know something, Nadine, I found as well, because, some of my radio work as well as my own interests, that a lot of, most homeless people are men. It's about 80-90% of them. And a high proportion of those come from broken homes. They've lost everything. And they've lost
they
their
will
home.
have had the house taken from them. They will have been stripped of all their assets. They will have been bled dry every week by the Child Support Agency. And if they haven't got very strong support networks around, and this is where women are better at men at this, because women are better at creating support networks around them. Because they'll talk to their girlfriends and I was very, very grateful for the amazing support network I had around me at the time when it happened to me, and they were all women. And women who'd never been divorced, but they started finding resources for me, and it was one of those girlfriends that sent me to Fathers for Justice. I mean, it was fantastic. But men also don't like to be seen to be a victim of what is happening to them. So they, unless it's prized out of them, probably haven't chatted to their mates or their work colleagues, who probably wonder why they're disappearing off on a Thursday once a month, but they're going to court, I'm afraid, probably to fight for their children, and then they slowly become depressed, and then you get into the spiral of despair, and they're out of their house, they've got nowhere to live, their money's drying up. If they've got a job, their money's been taken straight from their bank account each month by the CSA before they've even got it. It's a very, very difficult cycle to break. And I can guarantee, it's like we were talking about the dads who commit suicide. You can trace it back every time to family breakdown. You can trace a lot of homeless situations, the alcohol and drugs, back to family breakdown, because you can go to a garage when you buy your car and have a support network, with you go back for your service every year and everything. And we've had this conversation with our priest several times. They will sell you marriage. They will sell you this Bible. They will sell you it, but there is no aftercare service.
Yes.
So when it all goes horribly wrong, there is nowhere for men to go.
That you're absolutely right, and this is so shockingly despairing. I just find, I see real pain. I've had guys have actually, grown men have had them cry on my shoulder because actually, I was the first person they met that listened to them, and it was horrific.
Who understood?
Horrific.
Yeah.
And it to me, I thought this is horrible. This could, we could swap seats, and that could have been me. That could be my brother.
That is some woman's son.
Yeah,
that
exactly.
That is some woman's ex-husband or partner. That is some woman's brother. Some woman's uncle.
Do you know? I remember one of my first encounters was with a young when I started getting involved in this. It was a few years ago. I can't remember where it was. It was north of London somewhere. I can't remember. It was a young man. He was about 23, 24 at the time. And he had a girlfriend when he was 19, like a lot of lads do, settled in, moved in with her. And between them, they had a baby. And he loved this little baby. I think it was a little boy. 6 months down the line, she just, she was slightly older than him. And she said, well, you're a good dad. You change the nappies, feed him, all the rest of it, but you're not going to see him anymore. And he thought she was joking to start with. He couldn't believe it. And she meant it because she found somebody else. She didn't want him anymore. He wasn't earning enough, just whatever reason. And the Kafkas woman came in, eventually called in to assess the situation and confirm, yes, you're not married, you have no rights to this child, you know, and he cried. He cried his eye. He was 21 at the time. He cried his eyes out. A young man, you know, he's a good-looking lad, this sort of thing. When they went to the family courts to make the decision, the Kafkas woman supported the mother's position that he should have no contact and said that he had displayed emotional instability in front of her.
Yes. Now you see what if you get angry and fight back, then you are violent and aggressive. Yes. And if you cry, you're emotionally unstable. You cannot win when they put these labels out there. And I know that one of the reasons I probably ended up in the family courts for 10 years was because I wouldn't play the female victim card. Mm-hmm. I fought back. I challenged. I most certainly did not sit there and behave how the judges expect me to behave. Because if they have no respect for me, then I will have no respect for them. It's a two-way street. And I challenged them. I answered them back. I probably on some occasions behaved appallingly. But I wasn't going to sit there and cry and play the victim card and do all the things that I have seen women do in courts since. Because I could see that it was this system that was so abusive, and I wasn't going to let this system dictate to me what was going to happen. But that is it. The Kafkas they do their soft evidence and their hard evidence, and they won't ever tell you this. And they will be assessing you, and I see that all the time. You know, if you're a dad and you're in there and you're getting upset and angry in court, they're going all violent, aggressive. You know, risk to the children. And if he's upset and emotional, you know, then he's unstable. You cannot win with the labels that they're trying to stick on you.
No.
This is why we have to change the law, and we have to get rid of... I mean, before they were in government, the Conservatives had always said that Kafkas wasn't fit for purpose. Yet the minute they got in government, they were boosting, giving them more money and giving them more power.
They said several times they're going to abolish Kafkas, but they didn't do it, did they? That's just it.
No, it's a very, very difficult situation. You know, as a man going into the family courts, I'm afraid statistically you are probably going to walk away, unfortunately, without your children. And it takes a very strong person to stick with it and try and break down those doors. And we're saying to ourselves, why in this day and age are we having to behave like? Because you end up in court pitting parent against parent, and as a judge and Kafkas officer, you're sitting back and you're watching them rip pieces out of each other. Like animals. That is not the way to play. It's very, and this is what I said in my interview last week with the Daily Mail, maybe it's too simple for this government. Maybe it's just too simple, the answer to this problem. You know, equality. 50-50, equality in law, right to see your children, open up family courts. Maybe it's just too simple for them.
Nadine, I wanted to get on a subject I think we might have discussed offline, and that was about child abduction, international child abduction. I think that's something you'd like to talk about, isn't it?
Yeah, well, I brought it up because, I mean, obviously we're going out across the United States as well, and hopefully being picked up in the UK, and I've seen an increase. And these are sometimes the cases that do make the press because they're considered unusual, but I can guarantee it's not that unusual. And it's when you have couples from different countries who've got together and had children, and they separate. Now, we have the Hague Convention, which we all believe to stand up in court, and that if you separate and take a child to another country, then the child should be brought back to its main country so that you can decide what's going to happen. And I've just seen, unfortunately, recently, that the Hague Convention is almost not worth the paper it's written on. We've got a case that we've been involved in, and when I looked at the history of that case, this is almost identical to one you've had in Texas, which is the case of Bart Hermer and his daughter Alicia. He's American and the mum is British, and it is exactly the same scenario as the Rinfrey Porter case, which is being heard in Connecticut next week. And this is the great thing about the States, actually. They do talk openly about the cases. You can go to the court, you can sit in, you can listen and see what's going on. And that's how we know about what's going on here. Child, in both situations, in Hermer's case and the Rinfrey Porter case, born in the United States, an American citizen, but mum up-sticked and moved back to her home country of the United Kingdom, and then started proceedings in the UK. And what in these cases has happened is that they have seen that you can abuse the UK family court system in the UK so much that actually you can deny contact by coming back here. Yes. And these cases have gone on for years. And in the Texas case, actually, back in the summer, the US courts, who'd already agreed that they had jurisdiction, and yes, the child was a US citizen, therefore they should be deciding what was going on, they ordered that the child be brought back to the United States. But mum's just turned around and stuck two fingers up because she's here in the United Kingdom. The UK courts say she can do what she wants. They're not agreeing with the US courts. And so there is no enforcement of that. And that's pretty much what's happened in the Rinfrey case. And they will obviously be, looking at the Texas case for comparisons here, that once mum has come back to the United Kingdom and starts proceedings here, she is claiming both that the jurisdiction is here. Now, you'd think the Hague Convention would step in here, but it has not worked. And so no. I am deeply concerned that this Hague Convention, it might be sitting there and might be used in a few occasions, but actually you can abuse the UK system to such an extent that you can ignore the system in the child's own country. That is very worrying.
It is. It's very much so. I just wanted to, for people who are not familiar with that, the Hague Convention, as it was called, Hague Convention on the Civil Aspects of International Child Abduction, just known as the Hague Convention by everyone else, was formulated in 1980, I think it came in. Yeah. And a bit of news that in the new year, Japan joined the Hague Convention and became the 91st country to ratify it. That's the news, if you like. Right. Just to put some
okay, so you now can't go off to Japan because hopefully they will enforce it. But what I'm seeing here is that certainly in the US cases where you've got US parents and UK parents, is that you can come and hide behind the UK system. It's almost, are we going to see that the UK becomes the country of choice where you go to deny contact? Yeah. The only way that the Texas case and the Connecticut case I see are going to be sorted out is either we're going to have a very tough US judge who's going to really hammer home at this, actually we do have jurisdiction and the UK courts, you are going to listen to us, or it becomes a criminal matter.
Well, there's this thing about the British system. I mean, we've had this thing with terrorists, right, that for several years Britain has been cited as one of the favourite places for terrorists to hang out because they were protected by the British system and could operate their various sordid campaigns. And I think there's Melanie Phillips wrote a book called Londonistan, which was quite interesting, basically emphasising that point, because then she gets slated for being a racist or something. But the same sort of principle arises, that the British system seems to stick two fingers up to everybody else.
Yeah.
Now, a little bit more news here, that the news is that the US plan to sanction countries over child abduction because it undermines the Hague Convention. This is a recent bit of news that a draft bill has been formulated in the US government. I think it's been passed by the House of Representatives in December. And it would give the US government the power to issue sanctions against countries who have signed the Hague Convention, but which it believes aren't fully complying with it. Well, maybe they need to do this to the UK. They need to sort of issue something like this. But in addition, countries which are not signatories to this international treaty could be sanctioned by the US government if they believe that they have not complied with a memorandum of understanding, which is a sort of international agreement by the back door. So that's what the US are trying to do at this moment, and hopefully these sort of situations, certainly with the Americans behind it, will no longer be the case in the UK. But knowing how the British work, maybe not.
Well, that's it. I mean, that and it's really worrying. That, I mean, we often see that. We often look at family courts and the family breakdown system as being a sort of a first world phenomenon because it's primarily an issue in places like the United Kingdom, United States, Canada, Europe, Australia, and New Zealand, and things like that. And we consider ourselves to be educated countries, leading the world. Yet when it comes to family, we are so far down the list that families just fall off the bottom of the list. They're not important, and we have a lot of situations where we're looking to the United States to be leading the way. I know it's a big country, and so we've got lots of states where obviously laws can be varied as well. So that makes it quite difficult. But Fathers for Justice is not just based in the UK. We are an international organisation, and so we are dealing on a daily basis, not just with cases here, but because of the way the world works now, and people are travelling and things like that, we are having more cross-border issues. And so we have to be raising the profile here and getting, people. It's about education, isn't it? It's not just educating people in this country about the problems. It's educating people around the world, and just so that they are aware of what might happen to them. But as you say, if the law is there and it doesn't back you up, then what hope have we got?
Well, Nadine, I just wanted to clarify to other people, you are the manager of Fathers of Justice, are you?
I'm the campaign director. So
campaign director, okay. We got you cited, the credentials properly. I wanted to ask you, if you don't mind, because after, was it because about 2005, I remember you crashing the British lottery.
2006, yeah.
2006, that's right, yes. 2006. So there's been little campaigns against various groups, and this thing with, I've got no name now, Kate Winslet.
Yeah.
Right. You've also got intentions to have a go at. I shouldn't use that word.
Well, that's how the press depicted it. We were those nasty men that were attacking Kate Winslet, but actually, no, I'm a woman.
Going to highlight bad parenting, I should say. Let's put it that way. By Kim Basinger, Katie Holmes, and Halle Berry, and I think there was something about Jerry Halliwell as well, maybe included in that.
Well, the reason we were looking at that was because, as you know, since we've been going, which is 12 years, we've had lots of different campaigns. We've been and done the Superman thing. That actually hasn't kind of been on anybody's agenda since 2008. And we are always looking at new ways to get the message across, because we're not like Greenpeace and Amnesty. We do not have a big bucket of cash. No. We operate on a very, very small shoestring, and so the way we do that is to get publicity, raise awareness. And so Matt and my background is marketing and PR, so we're able to use a lot of our skills and bring that to the campaign, Matt being the founder of Fathers for Justice and my husband. So what we're doing is always looking at new ways, because it can't be a stagnant campaign anyway. And so we were, when the Kate Winslet issue came along, we thought, well, these are high-profile women who, as we mentioned earlier, influence other women. Not only do we look at what they're wearing and what handbag they're carrying and how they've got their hair, it's how they're running their life. Yes. And there seemed to be a flurry over the last 5 to 10 years of really high-profile women who were taking this very anti-shared parenting attitude. And when we look back at it, there was a pattern forming. And I thought, well, children and teenagers are influenced by things like the X Factor and all those kind of programs, so they are going to be influenced by the actions of high-profile celebrities. And if this is their attitude towards shared parenting, this message will no doubt be filtered through to these younger generations, younger girls. And so we thought, well, this is a campaign that stretches across the Atlantic, because this is an issue that stretches across the Atlantic. And as I mentioned, the Texas case and the Connecticut case that's in court next week, we are seeing that more and more. So we have to look as an organisation of how we can take our message around the world. And these are high-profile women who've all, through their relationships, tried to exclude the father. And so,
they're setting role models, aren't they, for that sort of behaviour?
Yeah.
Negative role models, I might add.
It is a very negative role model. Yeah. And so we say to them, actually, and they've all done this in the public domain. Our actions are all out there. So we're not making something up. We are simply reporting what is already out there and highlighting it and reminding people. And there's, we've got another person who I'm afraid I can't mention, but that's going to be an even bigger story when that goes.
Well, hopefully so. We need all these things to happen. What I'd like to ask, there's one thing I'd like to ask, actually, because somebody a while back said that the concept of Fathers for Justice was actually born in Portsmouth. Maybe you could check with Matt to see if that was the case, because apparently the alleged story is that he met with 2 or 3 other guys in a Portsmouth cafe, And the idea was born there. So I'd like to just check historically whether that's the case. Maybe you could ask him sometime.
I will do. A lot of things have come out of Portsmouth, our fantastic Navy, but although I'm afraid you're all being cut back at the moment, aren't you, and losing all the jobs. Portsmouth is a fantastic place. I don't think it can quite claim to be the home of Fathers for Justice, only because I know Matt was living somewhere else at the time. Okay. But Portsmouth did play a very important part. I would not have been at the Fathers for Justice meeting in Southampton had it not been for a guy living in Portsmouth at the time who had arranged that meeting. And as I say, one of my girlfriends suggested that I went along to Fathers for Justice for some help and advice and support because my situation sounded so like the dad's. And the guy that arranged that meeting lived in Portsmouth, so I had to give him a ring. And if it wasn't for him, I would have not gone to that meeting. I would have never have met Matt, and I wouldn't be running the organisation today. So Portsmouth can have that little award, if you like.
It's just the birth of the concept. That was what I was looking for.
Yeah. Well, it came out of obviously Matt's own situation. He resolved that situation and was seeing his boys, but he realised that he had two boys. And obviously we now together have got our son Archie, who's 8. So it's not about us. It's about our children, and it's about our 3 boys.
And this is what it's all about. The right way through, it's about the children.
Yeah, absolutely.
All about the children. Well, it doesn't matter whether you're talking about family court stuff, the Hague Convention, whether you talk about domestic violence, it's the children.
It is.
It really is. And it's as simple as that. And you know, in all the fighting and you know, disruption,
people lose sight. They lose sight. They go in the courts, and it suddenly becomes about, you know, tearing strips off of each other, and they lose sight of it. We always say to people, never hate your et more than you love your children. And if you can remember that, and that is why, I mean, my daughter, she spent her entire childhood in the family courts up to the age of 10 or 11 it was. And in the end, I stepped out of that, and she instructed at the age of 10 and a half, 11, her own solicitor, so that the family courts would focus on her and not on me.
Yeah.
Because that's what they should have been doing for the 10 years previously.
Yes.
And no child should have to instruct their own solicitors and go to court and take over a case like that themselves.
Well, they should know it, shouldn't they? You'd expect solicitors to know better, but unfortunately, that's the sort of world we live in that respect.
Yeah. So this is not about us. This is about our children, our grandchildren, and everybody else's children out there. And we have to keep, you know, plugging away, keeping the campaign going, and letting people know. And that's why our campaign is always evolving, and it has to keep it in the public consciousness.
Folks, we've got another caller. One of our regulars, by the way. His name is Iron John. He's got a question. Iron, welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you, James, and hello to everyone. I had a question for Nadine, but first a compliment. I would just like to say that I think Fathers for Justice is a tremendous organization. I have always admired them and respected the work they have done, and I think I can speak. You're welcome, and I think I can speak safely for almost the entire men's rights movement when I say that we all respect you and admire you, and we think you're very brave. And I guess you're welcome. And I guess the question I have is how come we're not working together? I mean, you have so much you could teach us. We're just getting started doing the kind of work that you guys have been doing for ages now with the street activism and our protests. And God, it just seems like such a wasted opportunity.
Well, we'd love to be everywhere. That's the answer. We do try and cover as much of the UK and Europe and the States as we can from obviously over here in the UK. But the internet certainly does help because we can and then share information and get stuff out there. We do have plans to come to the United States. We're in a position now where we can do that a little bit more. So keep an eye on what we're doing, because we know that the message, I mean, it's often been the way that actually the UK is influenced by what's happening in America. So I often think maybe we should have come to you guys first, sorted you out, and maybe that would have filtered back to the UK. But your problem is exactly the same as our problem here. It's government-based. You've got a blockage there. What we do is not unique. You look at the girls in Russia with their Pussy Riot and their campaigning and their stunts. Anybody can do it. And this is what we say, just don't be afraid to have a go and stand up and speak. I know the United States is probably a little bit more litigious than the UK, and there's possibly a little worry that, if you go start climbing buildings, they're more like to shoot you probably than just arrest you. But, everybody can do their bit. Not everybody in the UK wants to dress up, climb a building and do the sort of things that we do. You can start writing to your senators, your MPs and things like that. There are things that you can do from home, and it only takes one person to start. But, do keep an eye on what we're doing, because we are going to start coming to the United States, spreading the word a bit more. And it's a big country, so mobilising people and getting people organised is a little bit more difficult. But we do it here in the UK with a very small team, so there is no reason why we can't do it there as well.
Well, is there anything we can do to help you in the meantime, or anything you can think of?
I would say, get people on our website, get people on our Facebook page, get them on our Twitter thing. That's something that you can do from wherever you are in the world. If you go to our main website, there's links to Facebook and Twitter there. The Facebook is incredibly active. There's a lot of stuff going on there. And when we put things up to say what you can do in the UK, it simply works the same in the United States. Follow our 10-point plan, follow the checklist, get writing. When's your next lot of elections? You've just had one last year, wasn't it, your presidential election? When's the next presidential?
We have a midterm election coming up.
Right, so that's the time when you've got to start mobilising people. We have a system here in the UK where you can email your MP. We have early day motions and things like that. So there must be the equivalent over there. Get those sort of things started. But we have found that the only way we can get publicity in this country is to do the kind of high-profile things, get the adverts out there, get a bit of controversy and get people talking about it. Once people start talking and society starts recognising what's going on, then you'll start to get a bit of a sea change, and that's what we do. But we will come, and we will help.
Yeah,
that is fantastic.
I just wanted to highlight on that, because when you're making a resurgence, of course, and it's glad to see you back in the frame. But when it's sort of like, I think Matt stopped Fathers of Justice one stage, didn't he? But there was a number of other groups that started up called Real Fathers of Justice, all sorts of varieties of Fathers of Justice. I don't know if some of them are still going. I know they're still going because I get occasional emails from them. But I was wondering, is there any plans to link with these people, who are, many of them were ex-Fathers of Justice campaigners, and maybe get a united front going?
I think if you look through the history of the Fathers' Rights movement and any kind of activism, and probably in the United States, there's always been copycat groups out there. There always will be, and there always have been. And unfortunately, what's happened over the last few years here in the UK, and actually it happened in the United States as well, is that our work was directly copied and passed off by other people who have absolutely no connection with us. Which is very upsetting for us, because obviously when you piggyback somebody else's reputation, and it's quite disrespectful, and it's in some cases it's very wrong. What we did when we started Fathers for Justice was that a lot of people had been to things like F&F, which is Families Need Fathers, and went to it, saw it, but it wasn't for them and it wasn't for Matt, so he created Fathers for Justice. I'm not saying that you have to join Fathers for Justice. It's not for everybody. If it's not for you, but you want to campaign for fathers' rights, go away and create your own one. Don't pinch our stuff. Don't, take all our copyright and our trademark. Go and do your own thing and come up with your own concept and your own name, because that's the most respectful thing to do, and it gets the message out there, because not everybody's going to like what we do, and I'm not saying that you've got to join us. If you don't want to be with us, fine, do something else. It's not going to affect what we do. But there are lots of copycat groups out there. They say that copying something is a form of flattery, but it's actually quite damaging to our campaign, because obviously then people look at other things and they think that what they're doing is us, and it can damage reputation and things like that. We've got a very strong brand, we've got a very strong message, we've got a very big organisation. We represent now nearly 42,000 families. We have no representation in government, so we are a very big organisation, and we have to use our own voice. So if people don't like what we do, fine, go off and do something else. I haven't got a problem with that. But we've got to all be campaigning for the kind of the same thing, because if you end up fighting amongst yourselves, you're not fighting the injustice in the family courts. So that's what we've got to focus on doing. Because what you'll find is that, lots of groups have their own different kind of connotations to what they do. So we stick to what we do. We know what we do. We know what we do best, and that's what we do. And we try not to get distracted by all the other groups, because it's a big enough job doing what we're doing.
I mean, you say about that. There are people. I'm going to cite a couple of them. I've encountered. Men Have Rights Too, and Healing Men. I think Healing Men are based in Wales mainly, and they've been trying to combat the corruption within the Welsh Assembly, because of people in the United States. I know that we're called the United Kingdom, but the Wales has its own assembly aside from the Westminster one. So many people perhaps don't realise that's the way the system works. But the Welsh Assembly, it appears, and what their powers are, has, it seems from what I'm getting, been corrupted very badly, worse than the English system, by the effect of feminist ideologues within it. Whereby they actually want to go into schools, and we were talking about this earlier with Erin. They actually want to go into schools, but they are targeting boys. And they don't see domestic violence as being a non-gender issue. They are very much. You're up against that, and I can see, campaign groups similar to Fathers for Justice coming against these people and being met with. Not just simply contempt, with utter hostility, because these people are no better than Stalinists. They are just like Stalinists. They're in our system, and the United States has got them as well as Britain and India, Australia, across the world. Canada certainly has, as Erin mentioned. I think that's important. Yeah. It's important then that we have those groups. But this is where we can't be everything to everybody. Fathers for Justice. We know what our campaign issues are. Our campaigns are 50-50, shared parenting, opening up the family courts and equality. We know that all these other side issues exist. We're very aware of them. Where we can, we comment and we try and influence and assist. But we can't spread ourselves too thinly. And I think sometimes if you try and be all things to all people, your focus and your direction dilutes to the extent that you don't achieve anything. We know what we're concentrating on, and that's why if those groups are concentrating on that, and that's good, that's what they should be focusing on, because they'll get more results by doing that. If we start diversifying, we're not going to achieve anything. So I totally appreciate what you're saying there, and to me, I see the whole thing as a big battlefront. Yeah. And like Fathers for Justice in one part of the battlefield, and Healing Men are somewhere else, and the Mankind are they're all in different parts of the battlefield, fighting the same battle, the same enemy, but in different areas. And you can't sort of run across and fight each other's battles so easily, because, like you say, you've got to hold your positions. Yeah. 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 I mean, we've got a very strong name, very strong brand, and people know what we stand for, and we mustn't lose sight of that as an organisation. And really, that's kind of, where I've been working over the last few years, is changing people's perception of us. We're not a bunch of angry men who hate women. Actually, we are men and women. And we've got to sort of finalise our key focus points, and that's what we do. And the way we campaign and the way we do things and raise awareness might not be comfortable for everybody, and that's fine. We're not forcing people to be with us and do what we do, but we get the message out there, and our numbers. We represent thousands of families. We've got a very, very active Facebook group with something like 22,000 people on there. And the one thing that I always try and get across to people is actually we are a campaign group that doesn't want to exist. We shouldn't be here. We shouldn't be doing it. But every day our numbers are growing, and that is a really bad sign. The thing is, I'd like to know about is are you getting lots of young people involved? Because that's where your strength comes from. And we need young teenagers and young men and women in their 20s. Yeah. And actually, one of the things we're looking at this year is the Freshers' Weeks, because you mentioned that young man of 19. That these are, I'm afraid, still effectively children themselves. They might be technically adults. Yes. But it's all about education, and one of the things we've looked at several times is going into universities in Freshers' Week, and it might be all a bit of a laugh and a bit of a game. And they're away from home for the first time, but that one night can change your life. Absolutely, yes. Excellent. Ian John, have you got anything to add to that? He's still there? Oh, we've lost him. Okay, never mind. Well, going on to about different campaigns and that. I mean, I don't know if you were following the campaigns in Toronto, in Canada, because there've been, a Voice for Men and CAFE, which is called the Canadian Association for Equality, actually are about equality. They've been quite prominent in Canada in combating the excesses of feminism, and actually not so much combating, but raising the issue of boys in education and the suicide rates and other issues. So, maybe, Fathers for Justice can plug into that and add their bit as far as family justice is concerned, to give that side and give some strength to organisations like CAFE.
Yep, be happy to. I mean, go to our website, find the way to contact us on there, and that's the quickest and easiest way to do it, and hook up with us and see what we can do. And as I say, our message is always very clear. If you get the equality there in law, then a lot of these problems will fade away. And that's why we've got to focus on changing the law here and in the United States and across Western Europe, because for decades we've campaigned for women's rights, and I'm concerned that over the last 10, 20 years that campaign for equality for women has changed into a very radical feminist movement that is actually about equality. It's equality at the expense of men, and that is what we are now up against. And it comes back to that fundamental point of law. If that law changes, then hopefully it will kind of let everything else flow behind it.
Okay, James Huff, are you still there? I don't know if you're still there. I don't know if we've run out of our time.
Oh yes, I am still here.
Yeah, have we run out of time?
Yes, we are running out of time. We've run out of time.
Can I just say thank you, Nadine O'Connor, for coming on, being very brave and coming out on this. Loads of stuff we could have covered and we haven't done. But anyway, let's hope for 2014 will be a rollback year against all the bad things, shall we say.
Let's hope so. Well, thank you very much for inviting me on. It's been lovely to talk to you all. And
Erin as well.
Yes. Yeah, I'd love to speak to Erin again. And if any dads out there want any more information about us, just go and look us up on the website, fathers-for-justice.org, and it's all on there for you.
Yeah, excellent. Okay, James, are you happy with that? Is everyone happy with that?
Oh, absolutely wonderful.
Okay. Well, I say good. Thank you very much for the rest of the world who's listening to that, and hopefully, we could have loved to have had loads of phone calls, things up. There wasn't the time for it, of course, but let's do this again. Let's keep this up.
Absolutely.
And let's have some more. I think that was a fairly positive show. A lot of discussion, a lot of issues there. Okay, so James Williams. I'm actually, I didn't mention my thing. Men's Matters. What did I say? Oh, you've switched me off. Men's Matters Radio. And that's goodbye from me. Thank you very much for A Voice for Men.
You have been listening to Revelations with Erin Pizzey and her co-host, Dean Esme. Our show's opening music is called Eternal Hope, and the closing piece is called Sunshine. Both pieces are by Kevin MacLeod and are used under the Creative Commons Attribution License, with a link in the show notes. We also wish to thank James Huff and Paul Elam, and indeed all those who are part of the A Voice for Men community, for their support for this show. Remember, in truth there is hope and healing, and we hope that you will be part of helping to spread the truth and the healing. Please join us next time in Revelations with Erin Pizzey.